Chapter 38 of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 38. The Compact. The first words that Albert uttered to his friend on the following morning contained a request that Franz would accompany him on a visit to the Count. True, the young man had warmly and energetically thanked the Count on the previous evening, but services such as he had rendered could never be too often acknowledged. Franz, who seemed attracted by some invisible influence towards the Count, in which terror was strangely mingled, felt an extreme reluctance to permit his friend to be exposed alone to the singular fascination that this mysterious personage seemed to exercise over him, and therefore made no objection to Albert's request, but at once accompanied him to the desired spot, and after a short delay the Count joined them in the salon. "My dear Count," said Albert, advancing to meet him, "permit me to repeat the poor thanks I offered last night, and to assure you that the remembrance of all I owe to you will never be effaced from my memory. Believe me, as long as I live, I shall never cease to dwell with grateful recollection on the prompt and important service you rendered me, and also to remember that to you I am indebted even for my life." "My dear, very good friend and excellent neighbour," replied the Count with a smile, "you really exaggerate my trifling exertions. You owe me nothing but some trifle of 20,000 francs, which you have been saved out of your travelling expenses, so that there is not much of a score between us. But you must really permit me to congratulate you on the ease and unconcern with which you resigned yourself to your fate, and the perfect indifference you manifested as to the turn events might take." "Upon my word," said Albert, "I deserve no credit for what I could not help, namely a determination to take everything as I found it, and to let those bandits see that although men get into troublesome scrapes all over the world, there is no nation but the French that can smile, even in the face of grim death itself. All that, however, has nothing to do with my obligations to you, and I now come to ask you whether, in my own person, my family, or connections, I can in any way serve you. My father, the Comte de Morcerf, although of Spanish origin, possesses considerable influence both at the court of France and Madrid, and I unhesitatingly place the best services of myself and all to whom my life is dear at your disposal." "Monsieur de Morcerf," replied the Count, "your offer, far from surprising me, is precisely what I expected from you, and I accept it in the same spirit of hearty sincerity with which it is made. Nay, I will go still further, and say that I had previously made up my mind to ask a great favour at your hands." "Oh, pray name it." "I am wholly a stranger to Paris. It is a city I have never yet seen." "Is it possible," exclaimed Albert, "that you have reached your present age without visiting the finest capital in the world? I can scarcely credit it." "Nevertheless, it is quite true. Still, I agree with you in thinking that my present ignorance of the first city in Europe is a reproach to me in every way, and calls for immediate correction. But in all probability I should have performed so important, so necessary a duty as that of making myself acquainted with the wonders and beauties of your justly celebrated capital, had I known any person who would have introduced me into the fashionable world. But unfortunately I possessed no acquaintance there, and of necessity was compelled to abandon the idea." "So distinguished an individual as yourself," cried Albert, "could scarcely have required an introduction." "You are most kind, but as regards myself, I can find no merit I possess, save that as a millionaire I might have become a partner in the speculations of Monsieur Aguado and Monsieur Rothschild, but as my motive in travelling to your capital would not have been for the pleasure of dabbling in stocks, I stayed away till some favourable chance should present itself of carrying my wish into execution. Your offer, however, smooths all difficulties, and I have only to ask you, my dear Monsieur de Morcerf," these words were accompanied by a most peculiar smile, "whether you undertake upon my arrival in France to open to me the doors of that fashionable world, of which I know no more than a Huron or a native of Cochin China." "Oh, that I do, and with infinite pleasure," answered Albert, "and so much the more readily as a letter received this morning from my father summons me to Paris in consequence of a treaty of marriage. My dear Franz, do not smile, I beg of you. With a family of high standing and connected with the very cream of Parisian society." "Connected by marriage, you mean?" said Franz laughingly. "Well, never mind how it is," answered Albert. "It comes to the same thing in the end. Perhaps by the time you return to Paris I shall be quite a sober, staid father of a family. A most edifying representative I shall make of all the domestic virtues, don't you think so? But as regards your wish to visit our fine city, my dear Count, I can only say that you may command me and mine to any extent you please." "Then it is settled," said the Count, "and I give you my solemn assurance that I only waited an opportunity like the present to realize the plans that I have long meditated." Franz did not doubt that these plans were the same concerning which the Count had dropped a few words in the grotto of Monte Cristo. And while the Count was speaking, the young man watched him closely, hoping to read something of his purpose in his face. But his countenance was inscrutable, especially when, as in the present case, it was veiled in a sphinx-like smile. "But tell me now, Count," exclaimed Albert, delighted at the idea of having to chaperone so distinguished a person as Monte Cristo, "tell me truly whether you are in earnest, or if this project of visiting Paris is merely one of the chimerical and uncertain air castles of which we make so many in the course of our lives, but which, like a house built on the sand, is liable to be blown over by the first puff of wind." "I pledge you my honour," returned the Count, "that I mean to do as I have said. Both inclination and positive necessity compel me to visit Paris." "When do you propose going thither?" "Have you made up your mind when you shall be there yourself?" "Certainly. In a fortnight or 3 weeks' time, that is to say, as fast as I can get there." "Nay," said the Count, "I will give you 3 months ere I join you. You see I make an ample allowance for all delays and difficulties." "And in 3 months' time," said Albert, "you will be at my house?" "Shall we make a positive appointment for a particular day and hour?" inquired the Count. "Only let me warn you that I am proverbial for my punctilious exactitude in keeping my engagements." "Day by day, hour for hour," said Albert. "That will suit me to a dot." "So be it, then," replied the Count, and extending his hand towards a calendar suspended near the chimney-piece, he said, "To-day is the 21st of February," and, drawing out his watch, added, "It is exactly 10:30 o'clock. And now promise me to remember this, and expect me the 21st of May, at the same hour in the forenoon." "Capital!" exclaimed Albert. "Your breakfast shall be waiting." "Where do you live?" "Numero 27, Rue de Helder." "Have you bachelor's apartments there? I hope my coming will not put you to any inconvenience." "I reside in my father's house, but occupy a pavilion at the farther side of the courtyard, entirely separated from the main building." "Quite sufficient," replied the Count, as taking out his tablets he wrote down number 27, Rue de Helder, 21st May, 10:30 in the morning. "Now then," said the Count, returning his tablets to his pocket, "make yourself perfectly easy. The hand of your timepiece will not be more accurate in marking the time than myself." "Shall I see you again ere my departure?" asked Albert. "That depends. When do you leave?" "Tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock." "In that case I must say adieu to you, as I am compelled to go to Naples. and shall not return hither before Saturday evening or Sunday morning. And you, Baron," pursued the Count, addressing Franz, "do you also depart tomorrow?" "Yes." "For France?" "No, for Venice. I shall remain in Italy for another year or two." "Then we shall not meet in Paris?" "I fear I shall not have the honour." "Well, since we must depart," said the Count, holding out a hand to each of the young men, "allow me to wish you both a safe and pleasant journey." It was the first time the hand of Franz had come in contact with that of the mysterious individual before him, and unconsciously he shuddered at its touch, for it felt cold and icy as that of a corpse. "Let us understand each other," said Albert. "It is agreed, is it not, that you are to be at numero 27 in the Rue du Helder on the 21st of May at 10:30 in the morning, and your word of honour passed for your punctuality?" "The 21st of May, at 10:30 in the morning, Rue du Helder, number 27," replied the Count. The young men then rose and, bowing to the Count, quitted the room. "What is the matter?" asked Albert of Franz, when they had returned to their own apartments. "You seem more than commonly thoughtful." "I will confess to you, Albert," replied Franz, "the Count is a very singular person, and the appointment you have made to meet him in Paris fills me with 1,000 apprehensions." "My dear fellow," exclaimed Albert, "what can there possibly be in that to excite uneasiness? Why, you must have lost your senses." "Whether I am in my senses or not," answered Franz, "that is the way I feel." "Listen to me, Franz," said Albert. "I am glad that the occasion has presented itself for saying this to you, for I have noticed how cold you are in your bearing towards the Count, while he, on the other hand, has always been courtesy itself to us. Have you anything particular against him?" "Possibly." "Did you ever meet him previously to coming hither?" "I have." "And where?" "Will you promise me not to repeat a single word of what I am about to tell you?" "I promise." "Upon your honour?" "Upon my honour." "Then listen to me." Franz then related to his friend the history of his excursion to the island of Monte Cristo, and of his finding a party of smugglers there, and the 2 Corsican bandits with them. He dwelt with considerable force and energy on the almost magical hospitality he had received from the Count, and the magnificence of his entertainment in the grotto of the 1,001 Nights. He recounted with circumstantial exactitude all the particulars of the supper, the hashish, the statues, the dream, and how at his awakening there remained no proof or trace of all these events, save the small yacht seen in the distant horizon, driving under full sail toward Porto Vecchio. Then he detailed the conversation overheard by him at the Colosseum between the Count and Vampa, in which the Count had promised to obtain the release of the bandit Peppino, an engagement which, as our readers are aware, he most faithfully fulfilled. At last he arrived at the adventure of the preceding night, and the embarrassment in which he found himself placed by not having sufficient cash by 600 or 700 piastres to make up the sum required, and finally of his application to the Count and the picturesque and satisfactory result that followed. Albert listened with the most profound attention. "Well," said he, when Franz had concluded, "what do you find to object to in all you have related? The Count is fond of travelling, and being rich, possesses a vessel of his own. Go but to Portsmouth or Southampton, and you will find the harbours crowded with the yachts belonging to such of the English as can afford the expense, and have the same liking for this amusement. Now, by way of having a resting place during his excursions, avoiding the wretched cookery which has been trying its best to poison me during the last 4 months, while you have manfully resisted its effects for as many years, and obtaining a bed on which it is possible to slumber, Monte Cristo has furnished for himself a temporary abode where you first found him, but, to prevent the possibility of the Tuscan government taking a fancy to his enchanted palace, and thereby depriving him of the advantages naturally expected from so large an outlay of capital, he has wisely enough purchased the island, and taken its name. Just ask yourself, my good fellow, whether there are not many persons of our acquaintance who assume the names of lands and properties they never in their lives were masters of." "But," said Franz, "the Corsican bandits that were among the crew of his vessel." "Why, really the thing seems to me simple enough. Nobody knows better than yourself that the bandits of Corsica are not rogues or thieves, but purely and simple fugitives, driven by some sinister motive from their native town or village, and that their fellowship involves no disgrace or stigma. For my own part, I protest that should I ever go to Corsica, my first visit, ere even I presented myself to the mayor or prefect, should be to the bandits of Colomba, if I could only manage to find them, for on my conscience they are a race of men I admire greatly." "Still," persisted Franz, "I suppose you will allow that such men as Vampa and his band are regular villains, who have no other motive than plunder when they seize your person. How do you explain the influence the Count evidently possessed over those ruffians?" "My good friend, as in all probability I owe my present safety to that influence, it would ill become me to search too closely into its source. Therefore, instead of condemning him for his intimacy with outlaws, you must give me leave to excuse any little irregularity there may be in such a connection, not altogether for preserving my life, for my own idea was that it never was in much danger, but certainly for saving me 4,000 piastres, which being translated means neither more nor less than 24,000 livres of our money, a sum at which most assuredly I should never have been estimated in France, proving most indisputably," added Albert with a laugh, "that no prophet is honoured in his own country." "Talking of countries," replied Franz, "of what country is the Count? What is his native tongue? Whence does he derive his immense fortune, and what were those events of his early life, a life as marvellous as unknown, that have tinctured his succeeding years with so dark and gloomy a misanthropy? Certainly, these are questions that in your place I should like to have answered." "My dear Franz," replied Albert, "when upon receipt of my letter you found the necessity of asking the Count's assistance, you promptly went to him, saying, 'My friend Albert de Morcerf is in danger. Help me to deliver him.' Was not that nearly what you said?" "It was." "Well, then, did he ask you, 'Who is Monsieur Albert de Morcerf? How does he come by his name, his fortune? What are his means of existence? What is his birthplace? Of what country is he a native?' Tell me, did he put all these questions to you?" "I confess he asked me none." "No, he merely came and freed me from the hands of Signor Vampa, where I can assure you, in spite of all my outward appearance of ease and unconcern, I did not very particularly care to remain. Now then, Franz, when for services so promptly and unhesitatingly rendered, he but asks me in return to do for him what is done daily for any Russian prince or Italian nobleman who may pass through Paris, merely to introduce him into society, would you have me refuse? My good fellow, you must have lost your senses to think it possible I could act with such cold-blooded policy." And this time it must be confessed that, contrary to the usual state of affairs in discussions between the young men, the effective arguments were all on Albert's side. "Well," said Franz with a sigh, "do as you please, my dear Viscount, for your arguments are beyond my powers of refutation. Still, in spite of all, you must admit that this Count of Monte Cristo is a most singular personage." "He is a philanthropist," answered the other, "and no doubt his motive in visiting Paris is to compete for the Monthyon prize, given, as you are aware, to whoever shall be proved to have most materially advanced the interests of virtue and humanity. If my vote and interest can obtain it for him, I will readily give him the one and promise the other. And now, my dear Franz, let us talk of something else. Come, shall we take our luncheon, and then pay a last visit to St. Peter's?" Franz silently assented, and the following afternoon at 5:30 the young men parted. Albert de Morcerf to return to Paris, and Franz d'Épinay to pass a fortnight at Venice. But ere he entered his travelling carriage, Albert, fearing that his expected guest might forget the engagement he had entered into, placed in the care of a waiter at the hotel a card to be delivered to the Count of Monte Cristo, on which, beneath the name of Vicomte Albert de Morcerf, he had written in pencil, 27 Rue du Helder, on the 21st of May, 10:30 a.m. End of chapter 38. Chapter 39 of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 39. The Guests. In the house in the Rue du Helder, where Albert had invited the Count of Monte Cristo, everything was being prepared on the morning of the 21st of May to do honour to the occasion. Albert de Morcerf inhabited a pavilion situated at the corner of a large court and directly opposite another building, in which were the servants' apartments. 2 windows only of the pavilion faced the street. 3 other windows looked into the court, and 2 at the back into the garden. Between the court and the garden, built in the heavy style of the imperial architecture, was the large and fashionable dwelling of the Count and Countess of Morcerf. A high wall surrounded the whole of the hotel, surmounted at intervals by vases filled with flowers, and broken in the centre by a large gate of gilded iron, which served as the carriage entrance. A small door, close to the lodge of the concierge, gave ingress and egress to the servants and masters when they were on foot. It was easy to discover that the delicate care of a mother unwilling to part from her son, and yet aware that a young man of the viscount's age required the full exercise of his liberty, had chosen this habitation for Albert. There were not lacking, however, evidences of what we may call the intelligent egoism of a youth who is charmed with the indolent, careless life of an only son, and who lives, as it were, in a gilded cage. By means of the 2 windows looking into the street, Albert could see all that passed. The sight of what is going on is necessary to young men, who always want to see the world traverse their horizon, even if that horizon is only a public thoroughfare. Then, should anything appear to merit a more minute examination, Albert de Morcerf could follow up his researches by means of a small gate, similar to that close to the concierge's door, and which merits a particular description. It was a little entrance that seemed never to have been opened since the house was built, so entirely was it covered with dust and dirt, but the well-oiled hinges and the locks told quite another story. This door was a mockery to the concierge, from whose vigilance and jurisdiction it was free, and like that famous portal in the Arabian Nights, opening at the sesame of Ali Baba, it was wont to swing backward at a cabalistic word or a concerted tap from without from the sweetest voices or whitest fingers in the world. At the end of a long corridor, with which the door communicated and which formed the antechamber, was on the right Albert's breakfast room, looking into the court, and on the left the salon looking into the garden. Shrubs and creeping plants covered the windows and hid from the garden and court these 2 apartments, the only rooms into which, as they were on the ground floor, the prying eyes of the curious could penetrate. On the floor above were similar rooms, with the addition of a 3rd formed out of the antechamber. These 3 rooms were a salon, a boudoir, and a bedroom. The salon downstairs was only an Algerian divan for the use of smokers. The boudoir upstairs communicated with the bedchamber by an invisible door on the staircase. It was evident that every precaution had been taken. Above this floor was a large atelier, which had been increased in size by pulling down the partitions, a pandemonium in which the artist and the dandy strove for preeminence. There were collected and piled up all Albert's successive caprices, hunting horns, bass viols, flutes, a whole orchestra, for Albert had had not a taste but a fancy for music, easels, palettes, brushes, pencils, for music had been succeeded by painting, foils, boxing gloves, broadswords, and single sticks, for, following the example of the fashionable young men of the time, Albert de Morcerf cultivated, with far more perseverance than music and drawing, the three arts that complete a dandy's education, i.e., fencing, boxing, and single stick. And it was here that he received Grisier, Cook, and Charles Leboucher. The rest of the furniture of this privileged apartment consisted of old cabinets, filled with Chinese porcelain and Japanese vases, Luca della Robbia Faviense, and Palissy platters of old armchairs, in which perhaps had sat Henri IV or Sully, Louis XIII or Richelieu, for two of these armchairs, adorned with a carved shield, on which were engraved the fleur-de-lis of France on an azure field, evidently came from the Louvre, or at least some royal residence. Over these dark and sombre chairs were thrown splendid stuffs, dyed beneath Persia's sun, or woven by the fingers of the women of Calcutta or of Chandanaga. What these stuffs did there, it was impossible to say. They awaited, while gratifying the eyes, a destination unknown to their owner himself. In the meantime, they filled the place with their golden and silky reflections. In the centre of the room was a Roller and Blanchet baby grand piano in rosewood, but holding the potentialities of an orchestra in its narrow and sonorous cavity, and groaning beneath the weight of the chefs-d'œuvre of Beethoven, Weber, Mozart, Haydn, Grétry, and Popora. On the walls, over the doors, on the ceiling, were swords, daggers, Malay creeses, maces, battle-axes, gilded damasked and inlaid suits of armour, dried plants, minerals, and stuffed birds, their flame-coloured wings outspread in motionless flight, and their beaks forever open. This was Albert's favourite lounging place. However, the morning of the appointment, the young man had established himself in the small salon downstairs. There, on a table, surrounded at some distance by a large and luxurious divan, every species of tobacco known, from the yellow tobacco of Petersburg to the black of Sinai, and so on along the scale from Maryland and Puerto Rico to Latakia, was exposed in pots of crackled earthenware, of which the Dutch are so fond. Beside them, in boxes of fragrant wood, were ranged, according to their size and quality, pueros, regalias, Havanas, and Manillas, and in an open cabinet a collection of German pipes, of chibouks, with their amber mouthpieces ornamented with coral, and of narghils, with their long tubes of Morocco, awaiting the caprice or the sympathy of the smokers. Albert had himself presided at the arrangement, or rather the symmetrical derangement, which, after coffee, the guests at a breakfast of modern days love to contemplate through the vapour that escapes from their mouths and ascends in long and fanciful wreaths to the ceiling. At 9:45, a valet entered. He composed with a little groom named John, and who only spoke English, all Albert's establishment, although the cook of the hotel was always at his service, and on great occasions the Count's chasseur also. This valet, whose name was Germain, and who enjoyed the entire confidence of his young master, held in one hand a number of papers, and in the other a packet of letters, which he gave to Albert. Albert glanced carelessly at the different missives, selected two written in a small and delicate hand, and enclosed in scented envelopes, opened them and perused their contents with some attention. "How did these letters come?" said he. "One by the post. Madame Danglars' footman left the other." "Let Madame Danglars know that I accept the place she offers me in her box. Wait. Then, during the day, tell Rosa that when I leave the opera I will sup with her as she wishes. Take her 6 bottles of different wine, Cyprus, sherry, and Malaga, and a barrel of Ostend oysters. Get them at Borel's, and be sure you say they are from me." "At what o'clock, sir, do you breakfast?" "What time is it now?" "At 9:45. "Very well. At 10:30. Debray will perhaps be obliged to go to the minister, and besides—" Albert looked at his tablets. "It is the hour I told the Count, 21st of May, at 10:30, and though I do not much rely upon his promise, I wish to be punctual. Is the Countess up yet?" "If you wish, I will inquire." "Yes, ask her for one of her liqueur cellaret, Mine is incomplete, and tell her I shall have the honour of seeing her about 3 o'clock, and that I request permission to introduce someone to her." The valet left the room. Albert threw himself on the divan, tore off the cover of 2 or 3 of the papers, looked at the theatre announcements, made a face, seeing they gave an opera and not a ballet, hunted vainly amongst the advertisements for a new tooth powder of which he had heard, and threw down, one after the other, the 3 leading papers of Paris, muttering, "These papers become more and more stupid every day." A moment after, a carriage stopped before the door, and the servant announced Monsieur Lucien Debray. A tall young man with light hair, clear grey eyes, and thin and compressed lips, dressed in a blue coat with beautifully carved gold buttons, a white neckcloth, and a tortoise-shell eyeglass suspended by a silken thread, and which by an effort of superciliary and zygomatic muscles he fixed in his eye, entered with a half-official air, without smiling or speaking. "Good morning, Lucien." "Good morning," said Albert. "Your punctuality really alarms me." "What do I say? Punctuality. You whom I expected last, you arrive at 5 minutes to 10, when the time fixed was half past. Has the ministry resigned?" "No, my dear fellow," returned the young man, seating himself on the divan. "Reassure yourself. We are tottering always, but we never fall, and I begin to believe that we shall pass into a state of immobility, and then the affairs of the peninsula will completely consolidate us." "True. You drive Don Carlos out of Spain." "No, no, my dear fellow. Do not confound our plans. We take him to the other side of the French frontier, and offer him hospitality at Bourges." "At Bourges?" "Yes, he has not much to complain of. Bourges is the capital of Charles VII. Do you not know that all Paris knew it yesterday, and the day before it had already transpired on the Bourse, and Monsieur Danglars, I do not know by what means that man contrives to obtain intelligence as soon as we do, made 1,000,000. "And you another order, for I see you have a blue ribbon at your buttonhole." "Yes, they sent me the order of Charles III," returned Debray carelessly. "Come, do not affect indifference, but confess you were pleased to have it." "Oh, it is very well as a finish to the toilet. It looks very neat on a black coat buttoned up." "And makes you resemble the Prince of Wales or the Duke of Reichstadt."
"It is for that reason you see me so early."
"Because you have the order of Charles III, and you wish to announce the good news to me?"
"No, because I passed the night writing letters, 25 dispatch. I returned home at daybreak and strove to sleep, but my head ached, and I got up to have a ride for an hour. At the Bois du Boulogne, ennui and hunger attacked me at once. 2 enemies who rarely accompany each other, and who are yet leagued against me, a sort of Carlo-Republican alliance. I then recollected you gave a breakfast this morning, and here I am. I am hungry. Feed me. I am bored. Amuse me."
"It is my duty as your host," returned Albert, ringing the bell, while Lucien turned over with his gold-mounted cane the papers that lay on the table. "Germain, a glass of sherry and a biscuit. In the meantime, my dear Lucien, here are cigars, contraband of course. Try them and persuade the minister to sell us such instead of poisoning us with cabbage leaves."
"Peste! I will do nothing of the kind. The moment they come from gouvernement, you would find them execrable. Besides, that does not concern the home, but the financial department. Address yourself to Monsieur Humann, section of the indirect contributions, corridor A, numéro 26.
"On my word," said Albert, "you astonish me by the extent of your knowledge. Take a cigar."
"Really, my dear Albert," replied Lucien, lighting a manila and a rose-coloured taper that burnt in a beautifully enamelled stand, "how happy you are to have nothing to do. You do not know your own good fortune."
"And what would you do, my dear diplomatist," replied Morcerf, with a slight degree of irony in his voice, "if you did nothing? What? private secretary to a minister, plunged at once into European cabals and Parisian intrigue, having kings and, better still, queens to protect, parties to unite, elections to direct, making more use of your cabinet with your pen and your telegraph than Napoleon did of his battlefields with his sword and his victories, possessing 25,000 francs a year besides your place, a horse for which Chateau Renaud offered you 400 louis, and which you would not part with, a tailor who never disappoints you, with the opera, the jockey club, and other diversions. Can you not amuse yourself? Well, I will amuse you. How? By introducing you to a new acquaintance. A man or a woman? A man. I know so many men already. But you do not know this man. Where does he come from? The end of the world? Farther still, perhaps. The deuce! I hope he does not bring our breakfast with him. Oh, no. Our breakfast comes from my father's kitchen. Are you hungry? Humiliating as such a confession is, I am. But I dined at Monsieur de Villefort's, and lawyers always give you very bad dinners. You would think they felt some remorse. Did you ever remark that? Ah, depreciate other persons' dinners. You ministers give such splendid ones. Yes, but we do not invite people of fashion. If we were not forced to entertain a parcel of country boobies because they think and vote with us, we should never dream of dining at home, I assure you. Well, take another glass of sherry and another biscuit. Willingly. Your Spanish wine is excellent. You see, we were quite right to pacify that country. Yes, but Don Carlos? Well, Don Carlos will drink Bordeaux, and in 10 years we will marry his son to the little queen. You will then obtain the golden fleece, if you are still in the ministry. I think, Albert, you have adopted the system of feeding me on smoke this morning. Well, you must allow it is the best thing for the stomach. But I hear Beauchamp in the next room. You can dispute together, and that will pass away the time. About what? About the papers. My dear friend, said Lucien with an air of sovereign contempt, do I ever read the papers? Then you will dispute the more. Monsieur Beauchamp, announced the servant. Come in, said Albert, rising and advancing to meet the young man. Here is Debray, who detests you without reading you. So he says. He is quite right, returned Beauchamp, for I criticize him without knowing what he does. Good day, Commander. Ah, you know all that already, said the private secretary, smiling and shaking hands with him. Pardieu! And what do they say of it in the world? In which world? We have so many worlds in the year of grace. 1838. In the entire political world of which you are one of the leaders. They say that it is quite fair, and that sowing so much red, you ought to reap a little blue. Come, that is not bad, said Lucien. Why do you not join our party, my dear Beauchamp? With your talents, you would make your fortune in 3 or 4 years. I only wait one thing before following your advice, that is, a minister who will hold office for 6 months. My dear Albert, one word, for I must give poor Lucien a respite. Do we breakfast or dine? I must go to the chamber, for our life is not an idle one. You only breakfast. I await 2 persons, and the instant they arrive, we shall sit down to table. End of chapter 39. Chapter 40 of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 40. The Breakfast. And what sort of persons do you expect to breakfast? Said Beauchamp. A gentleman and a diplomatist. Then we shall have to wait 2 hours for the gentleman and 3 for the diplomatist. I shall come back to dessert. Keep me some strawberries, coffee, and cigars. I shall take a cutlet on my way to the chamber. Do not do anything of the sort. For were the gentleman a Montmorency and the diplomatist a Metternich, We will breakfast at 11 in the meantime. Follow Debray's example and take a glass of sherry and a biscuit." "Be it so. I will stay. I must do something to distract my thoughts." "You are like Debray, and yet it seems to me that when the minister is out of spirits, the opposition ought to be joyous." "Ah, you do not know with what I am threatened. I shall hear this morning that Monsieur Danglars made a speech at the Chamber of Deputies, and at his wife's this evening I shall hear the tragedy of a peer of France. The devil take the constitutional government, and since we had our choice, as they say, at least, how could we choose that?" "I understand you must lay in a stock of hilarity." "Do not run down Monsieur Danglars' speeches," said Debray. "He votes for you, for he belongs to the opposition." "Pardieu, that is exactly the worst of all. I am waiting until you send him to speak at the Luxembourg, to laugh at my ease." "My dear friend," said Albert to Beauchamp, "it is plain that the affairs of Spain are settled, for you are most desperately out of humour this morning. Recollect that Parisian gossip has spoken of a marriage between myself and Mademoiselle Genet Danglars. I cannot in conscience, therefore, let you run down the speeches of a man who will one day say to me, 'Vicomte, you know I give my daughter 2 millions.'" "Ah, this marriage will never take place," said Beauchamp. "The king has made him a baron, and can make him a peer, but he cannot make him a gentleman, and the Count of Morcerf is too aristocratic to consent, for the paltry sum of 2 millions francs, to a mésalliance. The Viscount of Morcerf can only wed a marchioness." "But 2 millions francs make a nice little sum," replied Morcerf. "It is the social capital of a theatre on the boulevard, or a railroad from the Jardin des Plantes de la Râpée." "Never mind what he says, Morcerf," said Debray. "Do you marry her, you marry a money-bag label. It is true. Well, but what does it matter? It is better to have a blason less and a figure more on it. You have 7 martlets on your arms. Give 3 to your wife, and you will still have 4. That is one more than Monsieur de Guise had, who so nearly became the King of France, and whose cousin was Emperor of Germany." "On my word, I think you are right, Lucien," said Albert absently. "To be sure. Besides, every millionaire is as noble as a bastard. That is, he can be." "Do not say that, Debray," returned Beauchamp, laughing, "for here is Chateau Renaud, who, to cure you of your mania for paradoxes, will pass the award of Renaud de Montauban, his ancestor, through your body." "He will sully it then," returned Lucien, "for I am low, very low." "Oh, heavens!" cried Beauchamp. "The minister quotes Béranger. What shall we come to next?" "Monsieur de Chateau Renaud, Monsieur Maximilien Morel," said the servant, announcing 2 fresh guests. "Now then, to breakfast," said Beauchamp, "for if I remember, you told me you only expected 2 persons, Albert." "Morel," muttered Albert. "Morel? Who is he?" But before he had finished, Monsieur de Chateau Renaud, a handsome young man of 30, gentleman all over, that is, with the figure of a Guiche and the wit of a Montemart, took Albert's hand. "My dear Albert," said he, "let me introduce you to Monsieur Maximilien Morel, captain of Safie, my friend, and what is more, however the man speaks for himself, my preserver. Salute my hero, Viscount." And he stepped on one side to give place to a young man of refined and dignified bearing, with large and open brow, piercing eyes, and black moustache, whom our readers have already seen at Marseille under circumstances sufficiently dramatic not to be forgotten. A rich uniform, half French, half Oriental, set off his graceful and stalwart figure, and his broad chest was decorated with the Order of the Legion of Honour. The young officer bowed with easy and elegant politeness. "Monsieur," said Albert with affectionate courtesy, "the Count of Chateau Renaud knew how much pleasure this introduction would give me. You are his friend. Be ours also." "Well said," interrupted Chateau Renaud, "and pray that if you should ever be in a similar predicament, he may do as much for you as he did for me." "What has he done?" asked Albert. "Oh, nothing worth speaking of," said Morel, Monsieur de Château Renaud exaggerates." "Not worth speaking of," cried Château Renaud. "Life is not worth speaking of. That is rather too philosophical. On my word, Morel, it is very well for you who risk your life every day, but for me, who only did so once." "We gather from all this, Baron, that Captain Morel saved your life." "Exactly so." "On what occasion?" asked Beauchamp. "Beauchamp, my good fellow, you know I am starving," said Debray. "Do not set him off on some long story." "Well, I do not prevent your sitting down to table," replied Beauchamp. "Château Renaud can tell us while we eat our breakfast." "Gentlemen," said Morcerf, "it is only 10:15, and I expect someone else." "Ah, true, a diplomatist," observed Debray. "Diplomat or not, I don't know. I only know that he charged himself on my account with a mission, which he terminated so entirely to my satisfaction that had I been king, I should have instantly created him knight of all my orders, even had I been able to offer him the golden fleece and the garter." "Well, since we are not to sit down to table," said Debray, "take a glass of sherry and tell us all about it." "You all know that I had the fancy of going to Africa." "It is a road your ancestors have traced for you," said Albert gallantly. "Yes, but I doubt that your object was like theirs, to rescue the Holy Sepulchre." "You are quite right, Beauchamp," observed the young aristocrat. "It was only to fight as an amateur. I cannot bear duelling, since 2 seconds, whom I had chosen to arrange an affair, forced me to break the arm of one of my best friends, one whom you all know, poor Franz d'Épinay." "Ah, true," said Debray. "You did fight some time ago. About what?" "The devil take me if I remember," returned Château Renaud. "But I recollect perfectly one thing, that being unwilling to let such talents as mine sleep, I wished to try upon the Arabs the new pistols that had been given to me. In consequence, I embarked for Oran, and went from thence to Constantine, where I arrived just in time to witness the raising of the siege. I retreated with the rest for 48 hours. I endured the rain during the day and the cold during the night. Tolerably well, and the third morning my horse died of cold. Poor brute! Accustomed to be covered up and to have stove in the stable, the Arabian finds himself unable to bear 10 degrees of cold in Arabia." "That's why you want to purchase my English horse," said Debray. "You think he will bear the cold better." "You are mistaken, for I have made a vow never to return to Africa." "You were very much frightened, then?" asked Beauchamp. "Well, yes, and I had good reason to be so," replied Château Renaud. "I was retreating on foot, for my horse was dead. 6 Arabs came up full gallop to cut off my head. I shot 2 with my double-barrel gun, and 2 more with my pistols, but I was then disarmed, and 2 were still left. One seized me by the hair. That is why I now wear it so short, for no one knows what may happen. The other swung a yataghan, and I already felt the cold steel on my neck, when this gentleman, whom you see here, charged them, shot the one who held me by the hair, and cleft the skull of the other with his sabre. He had assigned himself the task of saving a man's life that day. Chance caused that man to be myself. When I am rich, I will order a statue of Chance from Clagman or Marochetti." "Yes," said Morel, smiling. "It was the 5th of September, the anniversary of the day on which my father was miraculously preserved. Therefore, as far as it lies in my power, I endeavour to celebrate it by some—" "Heroic action," interrupted Château Renaud. "I was chosen, but that is not all. After rescuing me from the sword, he rescued me from the cold, not by sharing his cloak with me like Saint Martin, but by giving me the whole, then from hunger by sharing with me, guess what?" "A Strasbourg pie?" asked Beauchamp. "No, his horse, of which we each of us ate a slice with a hearty appetite. It was very hard." "The horse," said Morcerf, laughing. "No, the sacrifice," returned Château Renaud. Ask Debray if he would sacrifice his English steed for a stranger." "Not for a stranger," said Debray, "but for a friend I might perhaps." "I divined that you would become mine, Count," replied Morel. "Besides, as I had the honour to tell you, heroism or not, sacrifice or not, that day I owed an offering to bad fortune in recompense for the favours good fortune had on other days granted to us." "The history to which Monsieur Morel alludes," continued Chateau Renaud, "is an admirable one, which he will tell you some day when you are better acquainted with him. To-day let us fill our stomachs and not our memories. What time do you breakfast, Albert?" "At 10:30. "Precisely?" asked Debray, taking out his watch. "Oh, you will give me 5 minutes' grace," replied Morcerf, "for I also expect a preserver." "Of whom?" "Of myself," cried Morcerf. "Parbleu! Do you think I cannot be saved as well as anyone else, and that there are only Arabs who cut off heads? Our breakfast is a philanthropic one, and we shall have at table, at least I hope, so 2 benefactors of humanity." "What shall we do?" said Debray. "We have only one Monthyon prize." "Well, it will be given to someone who has done nothing to deserve it," said Beauchamp. "That is the way the Academy mostly escapes from the dilemma." "And where does he come from?" asked Debray. "You have already answered the question once, but so vaguely that I venture to put it a second time." "Really," said Albert, "I do not know. When I invited him 3 months ago, he was then at Rome, but since that time who knows where he may have gone." "And you think him capable of being exact?" demanded Debray. "I think him capable of everything." "Well, with the 5 minutes' grace we have only 10 left." "I will profit by them to tell you something about my guest." "I beg your pardon," interrupted Beauchamp. "Are there any materials for an article in what you are going to tell us?" "Yes, and for a most curious one." "Go on, then, for I see I shall not get to the Chamber this morning, and I must make up for it." "I was at Rome during the last Carnival." "We know that," said Beauchamp. "Yes, but what you do not know is that I was carried off by bandits." "There are no bandits," cried Debray. "Yes, there are, and most hideous, or rather most admirable ones, for I found them ugly enough to frighten me." "Come, my dear Albert," said Debray, "confess that your cook is behindhand, that the oysters have not arrived from Ostend or Marennes, and that, like Madame de Maintenon, you are going to replace the dish by a story. Say so at once. We are sufficiently well bred to excuse you and to listen to your history, fabulous as it promises to be." "And I say to you, fabulous as it may seem, I tell it as a true one from the beginning to the end. The brigands had carried me off and conducted me to a gloomy spot called the Catacombs of Saint Sebastien." "I know it," said Chateau Renaud. "I narrowly escaped catching a fever there." "And I did more than that," replied Morcerf, "for I caught one. I was informed that I was prisoner until I paid the sum of 4,000 Roman crowns, about 24,000 francs. Unfortunately, I had not above 1,500. I was at the end of my journey and of my credit. I wrote to France, and were he here he would confirm every word. I wrote then to France that if he did not come with the 4,000 crowns before 6, at 10 minutes past I should have gone to join the blessed saints and glorious martyrs in whose company I had the honour of being, and Signor Luigi Vampa, such was the name of the chief of these bandits, would have scrupulously kept his word." "But France did come with the 4,000 crowns," said Chateau Renaud. "A man whose name is Franz d'Épinay or Albert de Morcerf has not much difficulty in procuring them." "No, he arrived accompanied simply by the guest I am going to present to you." "Ah, this gentleman is a Hercules killing Cacus, a Perseus freeing Andromeda." "No, he is a man about my own size." "Armed to the teeth." "He had not even a knitting needle." "But he paid your ransom." He said 2 words to the chief, and I was free."
"And they apologized to him for having carried you off?" said Beauchamp.
"Just so."
"Why, he is a second Ariosto."
"No, his name is the Count of Monte Cristo."
"There is no Count of Monte Cristo," said Debray.
"I do not think so," added Chateau Renaud, with the air of a man who knows the whole of the European nobility perfectly. "Does anyone know of anything of a Count of Monte Cristo?" "He comes possibly from the Holy Land, and one of his ancestors possessed Calvary as the Montemarts did the Dead Sea."
"I think I can assist your researches," said Maximilian.
"Monte Cristo is a little island I have often heard spoken of by the old sailors of my father employed, a grain of sand in the centre of the Mediterranean, an atom in the infinite." "Precisely," cried Albert. "Well, he of whom I speak is the lord and master of this grain of sand, of this atom. He has purchased the title of count somewhere in Tuscany."
"He is rich, then?"
"I believe so."
"But that ought to be visible."
"That is what deceives you, Debray."
"I do not understand you."
"Have you read the Arabian Nights?"
"What a question!"
"Well, do you know if the persons you see there are rich or poor? If their sacks of wheat are not rubies or diamonds? They seem like poor fishermen, and suddenly they open some mysterious cavern filled with the wealth of the Indies."
"Which means?"
"Which means that my Count of Monte Cristo is one of those fishermen. He has even a name taken from the book, since he calls himself Sinbad the Sailor, and has a cave filled with gold."
"And you have seen this cavern, Morcerf?"
asked Beauchamp. "No, but Franz has. For heaven's sake, not a word of this before him. Franz went in with his eyes blindfolded and was waited on by mutes and by women to whom Cleopatra was a painted strumpet. Only he is not quite sure about the women, for they did not come until after he had taken hashish, so that what he took for women might have been simply a row of statues."
The 2 young men looked at Morcerf as if to say, "Are you mad, or are you laughing at us?"
"And I also," said Morrel thoughtfully, "have heard something like this from an old sailor named Penelon." "Ah," cried Albert, "it is very lucky that Monsieur Morrel comes to aid me. You are vexed, are you not, that he thus gives a clue to the labyrinth?"
"My dear Albert," said Debray, "what you tell us is so extraordinary."
"Ah, because your ambassadors and your consuls do not tell you of them. They have no time. They are too much taken up with interfering in the affairs of their countrymen who travel."
"How you get angry and attack our poor agents! How will you have them protect you? The Chamber cuts down their salaries every day, so that now they have scarcely any. Will you be ambassador, Albert? I will send you to Constantinople."
"No, lest on the first demonstration I make in favour of Mehmet Ali, the Sultan send me the bowstring and makes my secretary strangle me."
"You say very true," responded Debray.
"Yes," said Albert, "but this has nothing to do with the existence of the Count of Monte Cristo."
"Pardieu, everyone exists."
"Doubtless, but not in the same way. Everyone has not black slaves, a princely retinue, an arsenal of weapons that would do credit to an Arabian fortress, horses that cost 6,000 francs apiece, and Greek mistresses."
"Have you seen the Greek mistress?"
"I have both seen and heard her. I saw her at the theatre, and heard her one morning when I breakfasted with the Count."
"He eats, then?"
"Yes, but so little it can hardly be called eating."
"He must be a vampire."
"Laugh if you will. The Countess G., who knew Lord Ruthven, declared that the Count was a vampire."
"Ah, capital," said Beauchamp. "For a man not connected with newspapers, here is the pendant to the famous sea serpent of the Constitutionnel."
"Wild eyes, the iris of which contracts or dilates at pleasure," said Debray. "Facial angle strongly developed, magnificent forehead, livid complexion, black beard, sharp and white teeth, politeness unexceptionable." "Just so, Lucien," returned Morcerf. "You have described him feature for feature. Yes, keen and cutting politeness. This man has often made me shudder. And one day that we were viewing an execution, I thought I should faint more from hearing the cold and calm manner in which he spoke of every description of torture than from the sight of the executioner and the culprit." "Did he not conduct you to the ruins of the Colosseum and suck your blood?" asked Beauchamp. "Or, having delivered you, make you sign a flaming parchment, surrendering your soul to him as Esau did his birthright?" Rail on at your ease, gentlemen," said Morcerf, somewhat piqued. "When I look at you Parisian, idler on the Boulevard des Grands or the Bois de Boulogne, and think of this man, it seems to me we are not of the same race." "I am highly flattered," returned Beauchamp. "At the same time," added Château Renaud, "your Count of Monte Cristo is a very fine fellow, always excepting his little arrangements with the Italian banditti." "There are no Italian banditti," said Debray. "No vampire," cried Beauchamp. "No Count of Monte Cristo," added Debray. "There is 10:30 striking. Albert!" "Confess you have dreamed this, and let us sit down to breakfast," continued Beauchamp. But the sound of the clock had not died away when Germain announced, "His Excellency, the Count of Monte Cristo." The involuntary start everyone gave proved how much Morcerf's narrative had impressed them, and Albert himself could not wholly refrain from manifesting sudden emotion. He had not heard a carriage stop in the street, or steps in the antechamber. The door had itself opened noiselessly. The Count appeared, dressed with the greatest simplicity, but the most fastidious dandy could have found nothing to cavil at in his toilet. Every article of dress, hat, coat, gloves, and boots, was from the first makers. He seemed scarcely 35, but what struck everybody was his extreme resemblance to the portrait Debray had drawn. The Count advanced, smiling, into the centre of the room, and approached Albert, who hastened towards him, holding out his hand in a ceremonial manner. "Punctuality," said Monte Cristo, "is the politeness of kings, according to one of your sovereigns, I think, but it is not the same with travellers. However, I hope you will excuse the 2 or 3 seconds I am behindhand. 500 leagues are not to be accomplished without some trouble, and especially in France, where it seems it is forbidden to beat the postilions." "My dear Count," replied Albert, "I was announcing your visit to some of my friends, whom I had invited in consequence of the promise you did me the honour to make, and whom I now present to you. They are the Count of Château Renaud, whose nobility goes back to the 12 peers, and whose ancestors had a place at the Round Table. Monsieur Lucien Debray, private secretary to the Minister of the Interior. Monsieur Beauchamp, an editor of a paper, and the terror of the French gouvernement, but of whom, in spite of his national celebrity, you perhaps have not heard in Italy, since his paper is prohibited there, and Monsieur Maximilien Morel, captain of Safille." At this name the Count, who had hitherto saluted every one with courtesy, but at the same time with coldness and formality, stepped a pace forward, and a slight tinge of red coloured his pale cheeks. "You wear the uniform of the new French conquerors, monsieur," said he. "It is a handsome uniform." No one could have said what caused the Count's voice to vibrate so deeply, and what made his eye flash, which was in general so clear, lustrous, and limpid when he pleased. "You have never seen our Africans, Count?" said Albert. "Never," replied the Count, who was by this time perfectly master of himself again. "Well, beneath this uniform beats one of the bravest and noblest hearts in the whole army." "Oh, Monsieur de Morcerf," interrupted Morel. "Let me go on, Captain, and we have just heard," continued Albert, "of a new deed of his, and so heroic a one that, although I have seen him today for the first time, I request you to allow me to introduce him as my friend." At these words it was still possible to observe in Monte Cristo the concentrated look, changing colour and slight trembling of the eyelid that show emotion. "Ah, you have a noble heart," said the Count. "So much the better." This exclamation, which corresponded to the Count's own thought rather than to what Albert was saying, surprised everybody, and especially Morel, who looked at Monte Cristo with wonder. But at the same time the intonation was so soft that, however strange the speech might seem, it was impossible to be offended at it. "Why should he doubt it?" said Beauchamp to Château Renaud. "In reality," replied the latter, who with his aristocratic glance and his knowledge of the world had penetrated at once all that was penetrable in Monte Cristo, "Albert has not deceived us, for the Count is a most singular being. What say you, Morel?" "Ma foi, he has an open look about him that pleases me, in spite of the singular remark he has made about me." "Gentlemen," said Albert, "Germain informs me that breakfast is ready. My dear Count, allow me to show you the way." They passed silently into the breakfast room, and every one took his place. "Gentlemen," said the Count, seating himself, "permit me to make a confession which must form my excuse for any improprieties I may commit. I am a stranger, and a stranger to such a degree that this is the first time I have ever been at Paris. The French way of living is utterly unknown to me, and up to the present time I have followed the Eastern customs, which are entirely in contrast to the Parisian. I beg you, therefore, to excuse if you find anything in me too Turkish, too Italian, or too Arabian. Now then, let us breakfast." "With what an air he says all this," muttered Beauchamp. "Decidedly, he is a great man." "A great man in his own country," added Debray. "A great man in every country, Monsieur Debray," said Château Renaud. The Count was, it may be remembered, a most temperate guest. Albert remarked this, expressing his fears lest at the outset the Parisian mode of life should displease the traveller in the most essential point. "My dear Count," said he, "I fear one thing, and that is that the fare of the Rue du Helder is not so much to your taste as that of the Piazza di Spagna. I ought to have consulted you on the point, and have had some dishes prepared expressly." "Did you know me better," returned the Count, smiling, "you would not give one thought of such a thing for a traveller like myself, who has successfully lived on macaroni at Naples, polenta at Milan, olla podrida at Valencia, pilau at Constantinople, carrick in India, and swallows' nests in China. I eat everywhere and of everything, only I eat but little, and to-day, that you reproach me with my want of appetite, is my day of appetite, for I have not eaten since yesterday morning." "What!" cried all the guests. "You have not eaten for 24 hours?" "No," replied the Count. "I was forced to go out of my road to obtain some information near Nîmes, so that I was somewhat late, and therefore I did not choose to stop." "And you ate in your carriage?" asked Morcerf. "No, I slept, as I generally do when I am weary without having the courage to amuse myself, or when I am hungry without feeling inclined to eat." "But you can sleep when you please, monsieur," said Morel. "Yes." "You have a recipe for it?" "An infallible one." "That would be invaluable to us in Africa, who have not always any food to eat and rarely anything to drink." "Yes," said Monte Cristo, "but unfortunately a recipe excellent for a man like myself would be very dangerous applied to an army, which might not awake when it was needed." "May we inquire what is this recipe?" asked Debray. "Oh, yes," returned Monte Cristo. "I make no secret of it. It is a mixture of excellent opium, which I fetched myself from Canton in order to have it pure, and the best hashish which grows in the East, that is between the Tigris and the Euphrates. These two ingredients are mixed in equal proportions and formed into pills. 10 minutes after one is taken, the effect is produced. Ask Baron Franz d'Épinay. I think he tasted them one day." "Yes," replied Morcerf. "He said something about it to me." "But," said Beauchamp, who, as became a journalist, was very incredulous, "you always carry this drug about you?"
Always. Would it be an indiscretion to ask to see these precious pills? Continued Beauchamp, hoping to take him at a disadvantage. No, monsieur, returned the Count, and he drew from his pocket a marvellous casket, formed out of a single emerald and closed by a golden lid which unscrewed and gave passage to a small greenish-coloured pellet about the size of a pea. This ball had an acrid and penetrating odour. There were 4 or 5 more in the emerald, which would contain about a dozen. The casket passed around the table, but it was more to examine the admirable emerald than to see the pills that it passed from hand to hand. "And is it your cook who prepares these pills?" asked Beauchamp. "Oh, no, monsieur," replied Monte Cristo. "I do not thus betray my enjoyments to the vulgar. I am a tolerable chemist, and prepare my pills myself." "This is a magnificent emerald, and the largest I have ever seen," said Chateau Renaud, "although my mother has some remarkable family jewels." "I had 3 similar ones," returned Monte Cristo. "I gave one to the Sultan, who mounted it in his sabre, another to our Holy Father the Pope, who had it set in his tiara, opposite to one nearly as large, though not so fine, given by the Emperor Napoleon to his predecessor, Pius VII. I kept the 3rd for myself, and I had it hollowed out, which reduced its value, but rendered it more commodious for the purpose I intended." Everyone looked at Monte Cristo with astonishment. He spoke with so much simplicity that it was evident he spoke the truth, or that he was mad. However, the sight of the emerald made them naturally incline to the former belief. "And what did these 2 sovereigns give you in exchange for these magnificent presents?" asked Debray. "The Sultan, the liberty of a woman," replied the Count. "The Pope, the life of a man, so that once in my life I have been as powerful as if heaven had brought me into the world on the steps of a throne." "And it was Peppino you saved, was it not?" cried Morcerf. "It was for him that you obtained pardon." "Perhaps," returned the Count, smiling. "My dear Count, you have no idea what pleasure it gives me to hear you speak thus," said Morcerf. "I had announced you beforehand to my friends as an enchanter of the Arabian Nights, a wizard of the Middle Ages, but the Parisians are so subtle in paradox that they mistake for caprice of the imagination the most incontestable truths, when these truths do not form a part of their daily existence. For example, here is Debray, who reads, and Beauchamp, who prints. Every day a member of the Jockey Club has been stopped and robbed on the boulevard. 4 persons have been assassinated in the Rue Saint-Denis or the Faubourg Saint-Germain. 10, 15, or 20 thieves have been arrested in a café on the Boulevard du Temple or in the Thermes de Julien. And yet these same men deny the existence of the bandits in the Maremma, the Campagna di Romana, or the Pontine marshes. Tell him yourself, and I was taken by bandits, and that without your generous intercession I should now have been sleeping in the catacombs of Saint Sebastien, instead of receiving them in my humble abode in the Rue du Helder." "Ah," said Monte Cristo, "you promised me never to mention that circumstance." "It was not I who made that promise," cried Morcerf. "It must have been someone else whom you have rescued in the same manner, and whom you have forgotten. Pray speak of it, for I shall not only, I trust, relate the little I do know, but also a great deal I do not know." "It seems to me," returned the Count, smiling, "that you played a sufficiently important part to know as well as myself what happened." "Well, you promise me, if I tell all I know, to relate in your turn all that I do not know." "That is but fair," replied Monte Cristo. "Well," said Morcerf, "for 3 days I believed myself the object of the attentions of a mask, whom I took for a descendant of Tullia or Poppaea, while I was simply the object of the attentions of a contadina, and I say contadina to avoid saying peasant girl. What I know is that, like a fool, a greater fool than he of whom I spoke just now, I mistook this for a peasant girl, a young bandit of 15 or 16, with beardless chin and slim waist, and who, just as I was about to imprint a chaste salute on his lips, placed a pistol to my head, and, aided by 7 or 8 others,
led or rather dragged me to the catacombs of San Sebastian, where I found a highly educated brigand chief perusing Caesar's commentaries, and who deigned to leave off reading to inform me that unless the next morning before 6 o'clock 4,000 piastres were paid into his account at his banker's at 6:15, I should have ceased to exist. The letter is still to be seen, for it is in Franz d'Épinay's possession, signed by me and with a postscript of Monsieur Luigi Vampa. This is all I know. But I know not, Count, how you contrive to inspire so much respect in the bandits of Rome, who ordinarily have so little respect for anything. I assure you, Franz and I were lost in admiration." "Nothing more simple," returned the Count. "I had known the famous Vampa for more than 10 years. When he was quite a child and only a shepherd, I gave him a few gold pieces for showing me my way, and he, in order to repay me, gave me a poniard, the hilt of which he had carved with his own hand, and which you may have seen in my collection of arms. In after years, whether he had forgotten this interchange of presents, which ought to have cemented our friendship, or whether he did not recollect me, he sought to take me, but on the contrary it was I who captured him and a dozen of his band. I might have handed him over to Roman justice, which is somewhat expeditious, and which would have been particularly so with him, but I did nothing of the sort. I suffered him and his band to depart." "With the condition that they should sin no more," said Beauchamp, laughing. "I see they kept their promise." "No, monsieur," returned Monte Cristo, "upon the simple condition that they should respect myself and my friends. Perhaps what I am about to say may seem strange to you, who are socialists and vaunt humanity and your duty to your neighbour, but I never seek to protect a society which does not protect me, and which, I will even say, generally occupies itself about me only to injure me, and thus by giving them a low place in my esteem, and preserving a neutrality towards them, it is society and my neighbour who are indebted to me." "Bravo!" cried Chateau Renaud. "You are the first man I have ever met sufficiently courageous to preach egotism. Bravo, Count, bravo!" "It is frank at least," said Morrel. "But I am sure that the Count does not regret having once deviated from the principles he has so boldly avowed." "How have I deviated from those principles, monsieur?" asked Monte Cristo, who could not help looking at Morrel with so much intensity that 2 or 3 times the young man had been unable to sustain that clear and piercing glance. "Why, it seems to me," replied Morrel, "that in delivering Monsieur de Morcerf, whom you did not know, you did good to your neighbour and to society." "Of which he is the brightest ornament," said Beauchamp, drinking off a glass of champagne. "My dear Count," cried Morcerf, "you are at fault. You, one of the most formidable logicians I know, and you must see it clearly proved that instead of being an egotist, you are a philanthropist. Ah, you call yourself Oriental, a Levantine, Maltese, Indian, Chinese. Your family name is Monte Cristo. Sinbad the Sailor is your baptismal appellation, and yet the first day you set foot in Paris, you instinctively display the greatest virtue, or rather the chief defect, of us eccentric Parisians. That is, you assume the views you have not, and conceal the virtues you possess." "My dear Vicomte," returned Monte Cristo, "I do not see in all I have done anything that merits either from you or these gentlemen the pretended eulogies I have received. You were no stranger to me, for I knew you from the time I gave up 2 rooms to you, invited you to breakfast with me, lent you one of my carriages, witnessed the Carnival in your company, and saw with you from a window in the Piazza del Popolo the execution that affected you so much that you nearly fainted. I will appeal to any of these gentlemen. Could I leave my guest in the hands of a hideous bandit, as you term him? Besides, you know, I had the idea that you would introduce me into some of the Paris salons when I came to France. You might some time ago have looked upon this resolution as a vague project, but today you see it was a reality, and you must submit to it under penalty of breaking your word." I will keep it, returned Morcerf. But I fear that you will be much disappointed, accustomed as you are to picturesque events and fantastic horizons. Amongst us you will not meet with any of these episodes with which your adventurous existence has so familiarized you. Our Chimborazo is Montmartre, our Himalaya is Mount Valerian, our great desert is the plain of Grenelle, where they are now boring an artesian well to water the caravans. We have plenty of thieves, though not so many as is said, but these thieves stand in far more dread of a policeman than a lord. France is so prosaic and Paris so civilized a city that you will not find in its 85 department. I say 85 because I do not include Corsica. You will not find then in these 85 departments a single hill on which there is not a telegraph or a grotto in which the commissary of police has not put up a gas lamp. There is but one service I can render you, and for that I place myself entirely at your orders. That is, to present or make my friends present you everywhere. Besides, you have no need of anyone to introduce you with your name and your fortune and your talent. Monte Cristo bowed with a somewhat ironical smile. You can present yourself everywhere and be well received. I can be useful in one way only. If knowledge of Parisian habits, of the means of rendering yourself comfortable, or of the bazaars can assist, you may depend upon me to find you a fitting dwelling here. I do not dare offer to share my apartments with you, as I shared yours at Rome. I, who do not profess egotism, but am yet egotist par excellence, for, except myself, these rooms would not hold a shadow more, unless that shadow were feminine. Ah, said the Count, that is a most conjugal reservation. I recollect that at Rome you said something of a projected marriage. May I congratulate you? The affair is still in projection. And he who says in projection means already decided, said Debray. No, replied Morcerf. My father is most anxious about it, and I hope he long to introduce you, if not to my wife, at least to my betrothed, Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars. Eugénie Danglars, said Monte Cristo. Tell me, is not her father Baron Danglars? Yes, returned Morcerf, a baron of a new creation. What matter, said Monte Cristo, if he has rendered the state services which merit his distinction? Enormous ones, answered Beauchamp. Although in reality a liberal, he negotiated a loan of 6 millions for Charles X in 1829, who made him a baron and chevalier of the Legion of Honor, so that he wears the ribbon, not, as you would think, in his waistcoat pocket, but at his buttonhole. Ah, interrupted Morcerf, laughing. Beauchamp, Beauchamp. Keep that for the Corsair or the Chiaravari, but spare my future father-in-law before me. Then turning to Monte Cristo, you just now spoke his name as if you knew the Baron. I do not know him, returned Monte Cristo, but I shall probably soon make his acquaintance, for I have a credit opened with him by the house of Richard and Blount of London, Arstein and Esquels of Vienna, and Thomson and French at Rome. As he pronounced the two last names, the Count glanced at Maximilien Morrel. If the stranger expected to produce an effect on Morrel, he was not mistaken. Maximilien started as if he had been electrified. Thomson and French, said he. Do you know this house, monsieur? They are my bankers in the capital of the Christian world, returned the Count quietly. Can my influence with them be of any service to you? Oh, Count, you could assist me perhaps in researches which have been up to the present fruitless. This house, in past years, did ours a great service, and has, I know not for what reason, always denied having rendered us this service. I shall be at your orders, said Monte Cristo, bowing. But, continued Morcerf, apropos of Danglars, we have strangely wandered from the subject. We were speaking of a suitable habitation for the Count of Monte Cristo. Come, gentlemen, let us all propose some place. Where shall we lodge this new guest in our great capital?
Faubourg Saint-Germain, said Chateau Renaud. The Count will find them a charming hotel, with a court and a garden.
Bah, Chateau Renaud, returned Debray. You only know your dull and gloomy Faubourg Saint-Germain. Do not pay any attention to him, Count. Live in the Chaussée d'Antin. That's the real centre of Paris.
Boulevard de l'Opéra, said Beauchamp. The second floor, a house with a balcony. The Count will have his cushions of silver cloth brought there, and as he smokes his gibouk, see all Paris pass before him. You have no idea, then, Morel? asked Chateau Renaud. You do not propose anything?
Oh, yes, returned the young man, smiling. On the contrary, I have one. But I expected the Count would be tempted by one of the brilliant proposals made him, yet as he has not replied to any of them, I will venture to offer him a suite of apartments in a charming hotel in the Pompadour style that my sister has inhabited for a year in the Rue Meslay.
You have a sister? asked the Count.
Yes, monsieur, a most excellent sister.
Married?
Nearly 9 years.
Happy?
asked the Count again.
As happy as it is permitted to a human creature to be, replied Maximilian. She married the man she loved, who remained faithful to us in our fallen fortunes, Emmanuel Herbaut.
Monte Cristo smiled imperceptibly.
I live there during my leave of absence, continued Maximilian, and I shall be together with my brother-in-law Emmanuel at the disposition of the Count whenever he thinks fit to honour us.
1 minute, cried Albert, without giving Monte Cristo the time to reply. Take care, you are going to immure a traveller Simbad the Sailor. A man who comes to see Paris, you are going to make a patriarch of him.
Oh, no, said Morel. My sister is 25. My brother-in-law is 30. They are gay, young, and happy. Besides, the Count will be in his own house, and only see them when he thinks fit to do so.
Thanks, monsieur, said Monte Cristo.
I shall content myself with being presented to your sister and her husband, if you will do me the honour to introduce me. But I cannot accept the offer of any one of these gentlemen, since my habitation is already prepared.
What? cried Morcerf. You are then going to an hotel? That will be very dull for you.
Was I so badly lodged at Rome? said Monte Cristo, smiling.
Parbleu! At Rome you spent 50,000 piastres in furnishing your apartments, but I presume that you are not disposed to spend a similar sum every day.
It is not that which deterred me, replied Monte Cristo. But as I determined to have a house to myself, I sent on my valet de chambre, and he ought by this time to have bought the house and furnished it.
But you have then a valet de chambre who knows Paris? said Beauchamp.
It is the first time he has ever been in Paris. He is black and cannot speak, returned Monte Cristo.
It is Ali, cried Albert in the midst of the general surprise.
Yes, Ali himself, my Nubian mute, whom you saw, I think, at Rome.
Certainly, said Morcerf. I recollect him perfectly. But how could you charge a Nubian to purchase a house and a mute to furnish it? You would do everything wrong.
Undeceive yourself, monsieur, replied Monte Cristo. I am quite sure that, on the contrary, he will choose everything as I wish. He knows my tastes, my caprice, my wants. He has been here a week, with the instinct of a hound. Hunting by himself, he will arrange everything for me. He knew that I should arrive today at 10 o'clock. He was waiting for me at 9 at the Barrière de Fontainebleau. He gave me this paper. It contains the number of my new abode. Read it yourself.
And Monte Cristo passed a paper to Albert.
Ah, that is really original, said Beauchamp. And very princely, added Chateau Renaud.
What, do you not know your house? asked Debray.
No, said Monte Cristo. I told you I do not wish to be behind my time. I dressed myself in the carriage and descended at the Viscount's door.
The young men looked at each other. They did not know if it was a comedy Monte Cristo was playing, but every word he uttered had such an air of simplicity that it was impossible to suppose what he said was false. Besides, why should he tell a falsehood?
We must content ourselves, then, said Beauchamp, with rendering the Count all the little service in our power.
I, in my quality of journalist, open all the theatres to him." "Thanks, monsieur," returned Monte Cristo. "My steward has orders to take a box at each theatre." "Is your steward also a Nubian?" asked Debray. "No, he is a countryman of yours, if a Corsican is a countryman of anyone's. But you know him, Monsieur de Morcerf." "Is it that excellent Monsieur Bertuccio, who understands hiring windows so well?" "Yes. You saw him the day I had the honour of receiving you. He has been a soldier, a smuggler, in fact. Everything. I would not be quite sure that he has not been mixed up with the police for some trifle. A stab with a knife, for instance." "And you have chosen this honest citizen for your steward?" said Debray. "Of how much does he rob you every year?" "On my word," replied the Count, "not more than another. I am sure he answers my purpose, knows no impossibility, and so I keep him." "Then," continued Château Renaud, "since you have an establishment, a steward, and a hotel in the Champs-Élysées, you only want a mistress." Albert smiled. He thought of the fair Greek he had seen in the Count's box at the Argentina and Valle theatres. "I have something better than that," said Monte Cristo. "I have a slave. You procure your mistresses from the opera, the vaudeville, or the variety. I purchased mine at Constantinople. It cost me more, but I have nothing to fear." "Don't you forget," replied Debray, laughing, "that we are Franks by name and Franks by nature, as King Charles said, and that the moment she puts her boot in France, your slave becomes free." "Who will tell her?" "The first person who sees her." "She only speaks Romaic." "That is different." "But at least we shall see her," said Beauchamp. "Or do you keep eunuchs as well as mutes?" "Oh, no," replied Monte Cristo. "I do not carry brutalism so far. Every one who surrounds me is free to quit me, and when they leave me will no longer have any need of me or anyone else. It is for that reason, perhaps, that they do not quit me. They have long since passed to dessert and cigars." "My dear Albert," said Debray, rising, "it is 2:30. Your guest is charming, but you leave the best company to go into the worst sometimes. I must return to the minister's. I will tell him of the Count, and we shall soon know of who he is." "Take care," returned Albert. "No one has been able to accomplish that." "Oh, we have 3 millions for our police. It is true they are almost always spent beforehand, but no matter, we shall still have 50,000 francs to spend for this purpose." "And when you know, will you tell me?" "I promise you. Au revoir, Albert. Gentlemen, good morning." As he left the room, Debray called out loudly, "My carriage!" "Bravo!" said Beauchamp to Albert. "I shall not go to the Chamber, but I have something better to offer my readers than a speech of Monsieur Danglars." "For heaven's sake, Beauchamp," returned Morcerf, "do not deprive me of the merit of introducing him everywhere. Is he not peculiar?" "He is more than that," replied Château Renaud. "He is one of the most extraordinary men I ever saw in my life. Are you coming, Morel?" "Directly. I have given my card to the Count, who has promised to pay us a visit at Rue Meslay, Numero 14. "Be sure I shall not fail to do so," returned the Count, bowing. And Maximilien Morel left the room with the Baron de Château Renaud, leaving Monte Cristo alone with Morcerf. End of chapter 40.